Hello there, and welcome back to the Codex. Today we're going to be doing a bit of a refresh of a Khora video that I put out before. I've actually taken that Khora video down because I honestly don't want people to use it, because this build is much better. But before we hop in to the main beef and potatoes of the video here, I do want to say the build that you're about to see is extremely similar to Kai's build that he put out in his Khora Perfected video. So I want to bring up his video. I want to say it's excellent quality. The editing is amazing, much better than my videos, I'll say that. So if you want to go see a video that is much prettier to watch and has the information presented in a fantastic fashion, please go watch his video. I don't want anybody to think that I'm copying his video. I've actually spoken to him personally, directly, about me making this video, and he said that he didn't have a problem. The Khora build, the mods, are literally the same as his video. So I'm saying that up front. And it's because that Khora build really is perfected. I actually cannot think of a better Khora build, and I was actually going to put forth a similar one. But then he put his video out, so I was kind of hesitant, thinking about, like, don't know if I should really do this, but there's been a lot of people in my community who wanted me to put out a new Khora video, because I've shown this newer version of the build that I'm using. So I just want to have something on my own channel that I can point people to, basically. But please go watch Kai's video. Like I said, it's amazing. The editing is fantastic. The information is amazing. I love his presentation. It's a great channel, so go check it out. Alright, now with that out of the way, let's go ahead and hop into the build here. So, here is the Khora build. We are utilizing, as you can see from perhaps the build title here on the A config, this is a Lycath's Hunt build. So there's a few main aspects that go into this build. One of them is Lycath's Hunt, and another one is Catalyzing Shields. So Catalyzing Shields. This makes your shields only have a fifth of their max capacity, so it cuts your shields down on Khora down to 93 shields. Now there's a reason why that's really important. It's because if you get your shields that low, and then you combine that with making your efficiency low with Blind Rage, so your abilities cost more, and then you use Brief Respite, Augur Reach, and then 2 more Augur mods on your secondary, Augur Secret and Augur Pact, it makes it so that each cast of Whip Claw will give you 104 shields back, because the drain is 38.75 thanks to Blind Rage, and 38.75 times 2.7, which is what you get from the 150% plus the 120% energy converted to shields from combining Respite with the 3 Augur mods. This gives you 104 shields per cast. That is higher than 93, which means that every single time you cast Whip Claw, you'll be maxing out that 1.33 shield, that's second, 1.33 second shield gate that you get from Catalyzing Shields. So if you are Whip Clawing more than once every 1.3 seconds, which you frequently will be, you will be completely immortal to everything except toxin damage. Now, speaking of toxin damage, one difference that this build does have from Kai's amazing build video that I did mention is that he used Arcane Fury and Arcane Resistance. Where is Resistance here? So, I'm not convinced that Resistance is actually a great arcane, because if you read it, it says 102% chance to resist toxin status effects. So it makes you completely immune to toxin status effects, but it does just do exactly that. You are only immune to the status effect, not the damage. So this will make you immune to the damage over time, because that's the status effect, is the dot, but you will still take the initial toxin damage hit of whatever is causing the dot. So given the fact that this is not at all a health-taking build, it's pure shield gate, even just that initial toxin hit, which will go through your shield, because that's what toxin damage does, that will kill you still in any like higher level mission on Steel Path. So I don't think Arcane Resistance will actually really save you, so I'm not using that. I'm using Aegis instead, which, to be honest, I also don't think you need, given the constant shield regen. But I was having kind of a hard time figuring out what arcane to put here. You definitely want to use Fury, because that's a free 180% melee damage, and that's obviously amazing for Whip Claw. The second arcane, that was kind of up to you. I will say, if you're like me, and you frequently use Dante Spectres, for example, or if you're just playing with somebody who will give you Overguard, so that you're mostly taking Overguard damage instead of shield damage, I would probably throw on Molt Efficiency, because if you have Overguard constantly protecting your shields from taking damage, so you have max shields all the time, then Multi-Efficiency will basically just give you a permanent extra 36% ability duration, which will be really convenient for keeping up your Strangle Dome without having to cast it as often and your Lycath's Hunt. So that's just a few notes there. Now for the rest of the mods here, we are using a double augment build. We're using Pilfering Strangle Dome to get more loot from enemies that are affected by the Strangle Dome. So again, this is just like more free orbs, more free resources, so on, so on. So it's good for loot farming. And then Accumulating Whip Claw. This mod is just straight up mandatory on Khora. You could not make a Khora build without using Accumulating Whip Claw. This stacks up to a 350% damage bonus, which is, of course, way too insane to pass up on, so absolutely use this. Again, we're using Blind Rage just to make our Whip Claw cost more, because this is what enables our shield gating. We're using Prime Continuity, primarily to keep up Strangle Dome, so it's doesn't require as much maintenance, because you do want to constantly keep down those Strangle Domes, again, for that loot buff and for that crowd control. It's also pretty convenient for Lycath's Hunt, which we'll talk about in a moment here. We're using Overextended plus Augur Reach to make sure you hit at least 200% range. Hitting at least 200% range is very important, because Whip Claw starts out with a 5-meter explosion radius that goes up to 10 meters at cap. So you need to have at least 200% range. That way, every time your Whip Claw explodes, it explodes in a 10-meter radius to get that max damage radius. It also, again, helps the range of Strangle Dome and the grab radius of Ensnare, so both of those are nice benefits as well. And again, Overextended is obvious, because strength doesn't actually really matter on this build. And Augur Reach is the other range mod instead of Stretch, because again, this is part of what enables our shield gate. You do need to have 3 total Augur mods and Brief Respite. Now, Equilibrium. This is the bread and butter of how this build has infinite energy, especially with only 45% efficiency. Equilibrium will convert all of the health orbs you pick up into also giving you 110% of their value as energy as well. So if you pick up a 50 health orb, you'll also get 55 energy. Combine that with Lycath's Hunt being our Helmet ability, replacing her third. This ability makes it so that every time that you get a melee kill, there's a 50% chance that the enemy that you just melee killed will drop a health orb. So essentially, half of the enemies that you whip call to death, which will be everyone, because you're playing as Khora, they will have a chance to drop a health orb, so you'll have a shitload of health orbs on the ground, which will be constantly feeding your Equilibrium, keeping that energy up. Lycath's Hunt also has a secondary effect of if you kill an enemy that has 5 or more status effects on them, you actually get duration back added to the ability. So if you keep priming enemies and then melee killing them, every kill on this build will give you 7.75 seconds back, which is why we're using this Cedo build that we're using here. The Cedo alt fire is incredible at priming enemies. So this is the build that I'm using here. I'm going to say that I'm going to drop that Prime Tactical Pump. That's kind of a flex spot mod there. So the rest of these mods I would absolutely use. The reason why we have Shivering Contagion on here, even though you can see we don't have cold damage, is because the alt fire of the Cedo randomly procs all 4 base elements. So you get cold, heat, electric, and toxin for free on the alt fire. So we're modded for heat, radiation, puncture, viral, but we're also going to get the free cold, heat, toxin, electric on top of that. So you are going to trigger Shivering Contagion, so it's super good on this. The reason why we're not using any conditional mods, so like why we're using Hell's Chamber instead of Galvanized Chamber, and why we're using Shotgun Stabbing instead of Galvanized, and Fatal Acceleration instead of Galvanized Acceleration, is because this is just our primer, so you're not actually going to get any kills with this, which means that you wouldn't activate any of the conditional buffs. So the regular mods are actually better if you're not getting kills, because they're slightly higher stats than the unbuffed Galvanized or conditional versions. So this last mod spot here, you can see you could use the reload mod like I was using. You could use Vigilante Armaments for more multi-shot. That's not bad. You know, that would make the status even more reliable, so that's an option. Regardless, I would just use these other mods just to make sure you have a good spread of stats and status chance, and spreading cold with Contagion. Now, one thing that is super essential is you do need to use primary dexterity on your Cedo and secondary dexterity on whatever gun you're using for your secondary. Your secondary doesn't matter. Only your primary does, because I highly recommend using the Cedo. Just whatever it is, make sure you use secondary dexterity, and it has to have Augur Seeker and Augur Pact. And I would recommend having Amalgam Barrel Diffusion, because again, since you're playing as Khora, you're probably never going to actually use your secondary to kill anything. So it's really just a stat stick for the Augur mods. And if you want it to be, it can also be a stat stick for some extra dodge speed, thanks to, like I said, Amalgam Barrel Diffusion, so I highly recommend that. Now let's get into the super important weapon on this loadout, which is your melee weapon. Now, this is the build that I would recommend no matter what melee that you're using. With just any regular melee using this exact same mods as seen here, your Whip Claw would end up with 217% crit chance and a 5x crit multiplier. Because Whip Claw has a 25% base crit chance, 25% base stats chance, and a base 2x crit multiplier. So the mods, the stats that you see here on the actual weapon don't matter. The only reason why your melee matters is because the mods that you put on it affect the base stats of Whip Claw. So don't think about these mods as affecting the Magistar or as affecting whatever melee you're putting on. Think about it as carrying over to Whip Claw. So with keeping that in mind, the 25% crit chance and the 2x crit multiplier that the Whip Claw has, it would result in 217% crit chance and a 5x crit multiplier with these mods. But on the Magistar, with the critical parallel perk from the Incarnate evolution, on the regular Magistar, not the Sancti, because the Incarnate on the Sancti has weaker stats, your Whip Claw base stats go up from 25% to 41% crit chance, and from 2x to 3x crit damage, which means that with this exact same mod setup, but now on the Magistar, your end result crit chance is now 356% and a 7.5x crit multiplier. This multiplier is further boosted by another 300% melee critical damage from the Operator Arcane Magus Aggress, which now lands us at a whopping 16.5x crit multiplier. Now it's worth noting that, let me hop over to Magus Aggress here. Magus Aggress is one of the reasons why the Magistar is the better Incarnate than the Ceramic Dagger for Khora, because you can only activate Magus Aggress with a Greatsword or a Hammer equipped, meaning that the Ceramic Dagger would lose the ability to grant you this extra 300% melee critical damage. Now, if we do the math to figure out the average critical damage multiplier, given that you will hit a tier 1 red crit about 44% of the time, and a tier 2 red crit about 56% of the time, this results in an average critical damage multiplier of over 56 times your modded damage. And this is without accounting for Tenacious Bond, which can grant you an additional 1.2x crit multiplier at the end of that calculation, so you would be at like 57.2 basically. You can, of course, also use the melee critical damage Archon Shards, which I have not included in these calculations, as the damage number will, of course, vary based on the amount of shards that you use. And you honestly don't really need any of those shards because her damage output is so high regardless. Now, on top of this build, again, the Arcane is part of this, so make sure that you use melee exposure. This will give you a free 240% corrosive damage. So with modding for Viral plus this Arcane, you'll have Viral and corrosive damage on your Whip Claw. Of course, that's a very potent combination. And, yeah, it's an insane amount of damage. And speaking of Archon Shards, let's go ahead and go over those. So we're using 2 Tau-Forged Ambers. One of them is casting speed. One of them is parkour velocity. We're using 2 Tau-Forged Azures, both for energy max, because if you recall in the build, we don't have Prime Flow on. So I wanted a little bit of higher energy reserve. That way, all of that energy that I'm getting from Lycath's Hunt, I actually have some room in my energy pool to put that somewhere. So this gives us an extra 150 with 2 of these together. And we are using 1 Tau-Forged Crimson Archon Shard for melee critical damage. The reason why this is not Violet is because, again, we don't have Flow on, which means we have less than 500 energy. So the Violet Shard would not get its double crit bonus, which makes it the same as a Crimson Shard, so there's no reason to use a Violet, basically. So again, you can drop this if you want to. You could make this another Parkour Shard. You can make this another Energy Shard. You really don't need this damage once you see how much damage that Khora is able to put out, which I'll show you in just a moment here. First, let's take a look at the Companion Venari. So even though we took off the Venari ability on Khora, you still have Venari. You just took off the ability to control it directly. Basically, the things that I care about in this build are Synth Deconstruct will give you, potentially a little bit more health orbs to, again, just really help you keep that energy up. Tandem Bond I really like, because it means that your Venari is able to essentially land melee hits for you. So when you combine this with the Dexterity Arcanes and running the Naramon Focus School, it makes it basically impossible to not always be at 12x combo. Like, you will constantly be at 12x combo. It's amazing. And we are using that Tenacious Bomb plus Bite, because why not get that free crit damage? Tech Assault keeps it alive a little bit, etc., etc. Basically, the rest of it's just to keep the companion alive. So that's fantastic. 4-year companion, you can run whatever you want. I would usually run a Cedo. I'm actually going to run no companion for the showcase here, just so that I don't have any exterior effects from my companion affecting the showcase. Like, if I were to run my Cedo, for example, it would occasionally make me orange crit instead of red crit, which is actually a nerf, so I'm not going to run that right now. I'll just run no companion. And speaking of Naramon, I mentioned Naramon. You want to run Naramon because of Power Spike. This makes it so that you gradually lose combo instead of all at once. So again, when you combine this with the Dexterity Arcanes, with Tandem Mono and Companion, you will always be at 12x combo. It's amazing. So now with that out of the way, I know that was a long explanation, let's go and actually showcase this Khora, shall we? But first I wanted to showcase in a really clear way how potent Magus Aggress is. So right now I have a full combo stacked up. Let's see how much damage that is. So you can see it looks like I've been hitting a lot of around 850k. Let's do that again. Yeah, you can see a ton of 850ks there. So it seems like that's our typical max baseline is 850,000 damage against these level 225 Steel Path Corrupted Heavy Gunners. So again, one more time. Yeah, around 850k. Now, let's activate that Magus Aggress I was talking about. So to do that, you go into your operator and you just melee. You do what's called melee transference, and now we have that 300% melee crit damage. Now let's see how much we hit. 1.2 million. I think I saw 1.7 million in there. 1.3 million, 1.7 million. 1.3, 1.7, yeah, so it looks like anywhere from 1.3 to 1.7 million now, just by activating that Aggress. So huge damage increase, as you can see. I just wanted to make that really clear before we hop into an actual mission here, where it might be harder to show things in a concise way, where there's a lot going on. Now we're going to hop into a Steel Path Conjunction Survival and showcase this build for real. Alright, so we're in a Lua Conjunction Steel Path Survival here. I've already got some of my melee combo built up. We are... There we go, we just hit that 12x mark. As you can see, we're doing a ton of damage. There's a 7.6 million. And by the way, I have not activated Magus Aggress yet. I'm going to do a little bit of gameplay just without it. Oh, there's what happens when you forget to activate that that ability. See, that's why you need to keep your Lycat's Hunt up, because if you run out of energy, no more Whip Claw, no more Shield Gate. So there's a good lesson for you. So let me go ahead and get that going again. There we go. Yeah, so don't let that Lycat's Hunt run out. That's why it's really important to make sure that you bring the Cedo, and I'll show you why right here. As you can see, when you kill those primed enemies, you get that duration back, as long as they're primed with at least 5 elements, which makes it extremely good at keeping that ability up, which also saves you even more energy, because, you know, then you don't have to spend the recasting cost of Lycat's Hunt, so it's very convenient. Let's go ahead and hit a primed crowd here. There we go. It's just jumped from 21 to 36 seconds just from killing a couple guys. Now we're at all the way back up at a full minute here. That's how easy it is to keep that going. You just gotta keep getting those primed enemy kills. Let's go ahead and activate Magus Aggress now and see how absurd this amount of damage is. There's a 13 million. And again, I don't even have a companion here. I think I just saw, yeah, 17 million. So I'm not priming these guys with any extra damage from a Sentinel. I'm not getting any extra damage from any kind of companion buffs like an Adarzo, for example. This is literally just the damage that Khora is able to do. This is how extreme her damage output is. And these enemies have, like, full armor. So if you're seeing 20 million damage against a fully armored enemy on Steel Path, that means that it's actually doing 200 million damage, being reduced by 90% by that 2700 armor. So you are doing plenty of damage here, and you can double that against enemies that are entangled. As you can see, I just hit 40 million right there. That works on Acolytes, by the way, which I think is truly hilarious, because it makes them stand still, not be able to do anything, and take double damage from Whip Claw, which you'll see here in a moment here, once I get one of them to spawn in. But yeah, as long as you keep using that whip claw, you can see you are completely invulnerable, basically, as long as nobody does any toxin damage, because you constantly have that shield gate going. So you're permanently invulnerable, you do way too much damage for enemies to handle, and you look good while you're doing it, I gotta say. Here's an Acolyte. There's no longer an Acolyte. Goodbye. So yeah, there's Khora for you. That pretty much sums up the video with that kill right there. If you guys liked it, definitely consider dropping a like and sub. You have no idea how much it helps the channel. I know this is the first video that I've dropped in a while. Sorry, I've been kind of away for a bit. I've had kind of a rough week or so, but I'm going to get back into the groove for you guys. There should be another video coming out by the weekend you can look forward to. And, but yeah, that's Khora. She's incredible. Absolutely one of my favorite frames by far. And again, I want to reiterate, if you haven't already seen Kai's video on a build extremely similar to this, please go watch this video. It's amazing. His editing is fantastic, and the information is amazing. So I'm going to end the video off with that, and I will see you guys in the next one.